Thank you, Minister, for being here. As a member of the Finance Committee, I found it very frustrating, as you know yourself, to try and get positive results for those customers affected by the tracker mortgage scandals. And what is particularly annoying was the growth in the numbers of those affected from month to month. And those banks claim that it took them time to identify all those who were removed or denied and not informed of their entitlement to a tracker mortgage. And one of the things I want to ask you is, in terms of people's entitlement to a tracker mortgage, and I note with interest the case by O'Dwyer solicitors in Ballyhonus recently against PTSB. Now, that was settled for a substantial amount more than was originally offered, but the basis of it was that they were wrongly not allowed to avail of the tracker mortgage. And I think there's a whole lot of people out there in that situation, and maybe you could clarify it for us here today in terms of, if a bank was offering a tracker mortgage or had a tracker mortgage, on their books over a period of time, and somebody went to them for a mortgage and they weren't offered the tracker mortgage option, then do they have a case to bring to under the central bank review? Because I think that's hugely important. And in terms of the numbers, I think if that is the case, which is the way that I would read this case in particular against PTSB, then I think the numbers will substantially increase. But yet we've been contacted by so many customers who are blue in the face, contacting their banks, asking to be included in the redress scheme, and the banks are still doing the bare minimum, and they're not listening to their own customers. And maybe again, Minister, you can clarify for me, if a bank refuses a client his or her file to be put under review, or to get their file in the first instance, what can they expect? Where do they go then, and how can we help them to do that? I want to highlight the work of my colleagues Donncha O'Leary and Pearse Doherty, who recently presented the multi-party action bill in the Dáil, and you'll know that this bill will allow class action to be taken by the likes of those who have suffered in the tracker mortgage scandal. And I think this class action move is hugely important, because there are many people who are financially constrained because of even the tracker mortgage issue, but indeed because of other issues, who cannot afford themselves to take action. So the class action provision needs to be there. Yet I have to ask if the government themselves have made any moves to ensure that there will be individual responsibility for this. Did the Minister put to the heads of the banks that they will indeed be action taking against individuals found out to be responsible? And I take what you're saying there in terms of the enforcement, and again I would credit the Finance Committee in terms of bringing that forward to push for enforcement. I'm going to Iceland next week, and I hope there to discuss how dozens of bankers in Iceland were sent to jail for the wrongdoings that they did within the banking system. But we know that Ireland doesn't do white-collar crime, it doesn't do prosecution of white-collar crime, and people are really waiting to see, in terms of the enforcement of this, is this going to happen here? And there's much action, Minister, that could have been taken. The Minister could have objected to the reappointment of the CEO of the Bank of Ireland, which the government is a majority shareholder. He could sack the boards of those from the other banks, being the permanent TSB and allied Irish banks. And I do find it somewhat amusing, and sometimes I empathise with the government in all of this, because Fianna Fáil will come out and make all these suggestions and allegations, but we know, everybody knows, the crux of the problem was the closeness of senior Fianna Fáil people and Fianna Fáil leaders to the bankers, and it was, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. And I am really sorry, Senator Hurkin, because I have great respect for you and the work that you've done on the Finance Committee as well. But the closeness and the playing the golf and the appointments to boards and all of those things created that, and I hate to call it culture, but that absolute corruption within the banking system that was allowed to happen. Governments are there to protect people, not to protect bankers and protect the elites. And that must never ever happen again, where there is that closeness.
1 minute.
Well, we have all the pictures and everything else there. But indeed, the banks, if you just allow me, because I know this truth really hurts. Are you going to? Are you going to?
You're wasting time. So every time you interfere, and I am strictly at 20 to bring the minister back in, and some people will be disappointed. You have less than a minute.
And you're right. You're right, Cathaoirleach. You'll just have to give me another minute to do that. The fact is that these people were robbed of their entitlements and their mortgage, and people suffered greatly, and we all know this. And again, I do want to commend the work of the Finance Committee around this and the efforts that are being made by the Central Bank as well. I want to ask the Minister, what's going to happen? I mean, the deadlines have been moved all of the time, but what's going to happen if the deadlines still aren't reached in terms of making the initial payments? This money, the initial payments, and not the whole of the redress even, but the money that we know is quantified there, and the banks know what it is, that needs to be paid back as quickly as possible into the customers' banks who are affected by all of that. So what are you going to do if that's not done? That's my question, and thank you, Cathaoirleach. I have loads more, but I know I don't have the time.
Senator Black.